The inside of the community hall felt more like a library than a place where art was supposed to happen. The air was still and cool, carrying that distinct smell of floor wax and old velvet that seems to live in every public building. Rows of metal chairs sat empty, waiting for the audience that would arrive later that evening. Right now, the only people in the room were a handful of nervous students and the judges. At the very front of the room, a young girl sat on the bench of a large, black grand piano. She looked small in comparison to the instrument. Her legs barely reached the pedals if she didn't stretch them out. This was her first big competition, the kind that could open doors for her future if she did well. She had practiced for this moment every single day for 6 months, missing out on trips with friends and skipping family dinners just to get the notes right. Her fingers were shaking, just a little bit, as she placed them on the white and black keys. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her head. She closed her eyes for a split second to imagine the piece in her mind, and then she started to play. It was a fast song, very difficult and technical. It required her hands to fly across the keyboard, hitting dozens of notes every second. The sound was loud and crashing, meant to show off speed and power. For the first minute, she felt okay. She was hitting the right keys, and the rhythm was steady. But inside, she felt panic. She wasn't connecting with the music. She was just a machine trying to keep up, terrified of making a mistake. The music filled the room, bouncing off the high ceiling and the glass windows, but it felt empty. It felt loud just for the sake of being loud. Then, the heavy click of hard shoes on the tiled floor echoed through the hall. The man walking down the center aisle was the head judge. He was older, with silver hair combed perfectly to the side. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive and strict. He didn't walk quietly or gently, he walked with purpose, like he owned the space and everyone in it. He had a reputation in the city for being tough. He didn't just look for mistakes in the notes, he looked for mistakes in the soul. If he thought you were boring, or if he thought you were just showing off, he would stop you without a second thought. He stopped at the edge of the stage, right in the girl's line of sight. He didn't smile. He stood with his arms crossed, his face looking like it was carved from stone. He watched her hands for a moment, his eyes narrowing. The girl saw him there, and her heart almost stopped. The sudden appearance of the famous, scary judge made her fingers stumble. She hit a wrong note, a jarring sound that rang out like a scream in the quiet hall. She tried to keep going, to recover and move past the mistake, but her panic made her hands heavy. The music became messy. The rhythm fell apart. Suddenly, the judge's voice cut through the air like a sharp knife. "Stop." It wasn't a shout. He didn't need to yell. His voice was deep and flat, commanding absolute obedience. It echoed in the large room, silencing the piano instantly. The girl pulled her hands away from the keys as if they had been burned. She sat there, frozen, her hands hovering in the air over the keyboard. The silence that followed was heavy and awful. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. She could feel her face turning hot with embarrassment. A few other students in the back of the room stopped whispering. Everyone was looking at her. The judge didn't move from his spot. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold, disappointed look that was much worse. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at a clipboard he was holding. "That is enough," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "We do not have time to listen to noise." The girl felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out of the room and hide. She opened her mouth to say she was sorry, to explain that she was nervous, but the words wouldn't come out. Her throat felt tight and dry. "You are banging on the instrument," the judge continued, his tone harsh and critical. "There is no skill in just playing loud. I hear speed, but I hear no music. You are treating this beautiful piano like a typewriter. It is painful to listen to." He looked up from his clipboard and stared right into her eyes. "If you cannot play with feeling, with actual heart, then do not play at all. You are wasting the time of the judges and you are wasting your own time." The girl lowered her head. She felt small and humiliated. She had worked so hard, and in 30 seconds, he had torn it all down. She nodded slowly, unable to speak. She reached out to close the lid of the piano, ready to pack up her sheet music and leave. She felt defeated. The spark she had when she walked into the room was gone, extinguished by a few cold sentences. The judge turned his back to her, clearly assuming she was finished. He began to walk away, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor again. He walked toward the judge's table at the side of the room, already looking at the next name on his list. He didn't look back. To him, she was just another student who wasn't ready for the big leagues. The room stayed quiet. The girl sat on the bench, her hands resting in her lap. She looked at the white keys, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. A part of her wanted to run. That was the smart thing to do. The judge had told her to stop. He had insulted her playing. If she left now, nobody would blame her. But then, another feeling rose up in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. It was a quiet stubbornness, a feeling that she didn't want to leave this way. She didn't want her time at the piano to end with him thinking she was just a noisy child. She looked at the back of the judge, who was now shuffling papers at the table. He wasn't paying attention to her anymore. He thought she was gone. She looked at the sheet music for the hard, fast song she had been playing. She didn't want to play that anymore. That song wasn't her. It was just what she thought they wanted to hear. She thought about her grandmother at home. She thought about the quiet afternoons they used to spend in the living room. Her grandmother wasn't a famous pianist. She didn't know how to play fast, complicated songs. But when her grandmother played, the house felt warm. The music used to float through the air, soft and gentle, making everyone stop what they were doing to listen. The girl took a shaky breath. She wiped her palms on her skirt. She didn't open her book to the next page. She left the difficult, aggressive piece on the stand. Instead, she moved her hands back to the keys. She didn't start playing right away. She waited for the clicking of the judge's pen to stop. She decided she wasn't going to play for the judge. She wasn't going to play for the points or the trophy. She was going to play for the feeling she missed. She was going to play the song that actually meant something to her. The girl lowered the volume pedal with her foot. She was done trying to be loud. She was done trying to impress a stone-faced man in a suit. She straightened her back, closed her eyes one last time, and let her fingers drop gently onto the keys. The heavy silence that filled the hall felt like a thick blanket. It was the kind of silence that hurts your ears. The girl sat on the bench, staring at her hands. They were resting in her lap, trembling slightly. She could feel the eyes of the other students on her. They were watching from the shadows in the back of the room, some with sympathy, some with relief that it wasn't them being scolded. The head judge was now sitting at the long table at the side of the hall. He had his back to her. He was writing something on a piece of paper, probably making a note about how terrible her performance was. He seemed to have already erased her from his mind. To him, she was just a mistake that had been corrected. The girl looked at the closed music book on the piano rack. It contained the hard, fast song she had practiced for months. But she didn't open it. She couldn't play it. Every time she thought about playing those notes now, she remembered the way the judge had looked at her. He had said she had no soul. He had said she was just making noise. And the scary part was, a small voice inside her head agreed with him. She had been playing to impress people, not to make them feel anything. She took a deep, shaky breath and let it out slowly. She reached out and pushed the heavy music book to the side. It slid across the smooth surface of the piano and stopped near the edge. She didn't need it anymore. She knew what she wanted to play. She knew the song with her heart, not just her fingers. It was a piece that was very different from the loud crashing music of the competition. It was a slow, soft melody that most people would find too simple. It was the kind of song that didn't show off how fast you could move your hands. It was the kind of song that only worked if you really meant it. She placed her hands back on the keys. Her fingers felt cold, but as they touched the ivory, a strange calmness washed over her. She wasn't thinking about the competition anymore. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing. She closed her eyes and pictured the living room of her childhood home. She remembered the way the sunlight used to come through the window in the late afternoon. She remembered the smell of old paper and tea. Most of all, she remembered the person who taught her to love music. She thought of her mother, who had been gone for 2 years. Her mother used to sit right where she was sitting now. Her mother played the song whenever the world felt too heavy. It was her way of fixing things. The girl pressed down on the first note. It wasn't a bang. It was a whisper. The sound floated up into the high ceiling, soft and clear. It was a single note that seemed to hang in the air for a long time before fading away. It was so quiet that at first, nobody in the hall reacted. Then came the second note, and then a third. She began to play the melody. It was Clair de Lune, a song that everyone knew, but she played it differently. She didn't play it like she was trying to get a good grade. She played it like she was having a conversation with someone she missed. The rhythm was slower than usual. She took her time with every phrase. She let the notes bleed into one another, creating a sound that was rich and warm. It felt like the air in the room changed instantly. The cold, sterile feeling of the community hall began to fade, replaced by something that felt like a memory. At the judge's table, the head judge stopped writing. His pen hovered just above the paper. He didn't turn around yet. He just sat there, his body rigid. He could hear the change in the atmosphere immediately. The aggressive energy from a few minutes ago was gone. He heard a sweetness in the tone that surprised him. The piano was an old instrument, but under the girl's fingers, it suddenly sounded brand new. She was coaxing sounds out of it that seemed impossible. She wasn't hitting the keys, she was caressing them. The girl kept her eyes shut. This helped her block out the room. She didn't see the janitor standing in the doorway, stopping to listen. She didn't see the other students putting down their instruments to stare. She was in her own world. She was remembering how her mother used to smile when the rain hit the window pane. She poured that feeling into the music. Every time she pressed a chord, she imagined she was reaching out to hold someone's hand. As she moved into the middle part of the song, the music got a little stronger, but it was never loud. It was like a wave rising and falling. It was sad, but it was a beautiful kind of sadness. It was the kind of sadness that makes you feel better because you know you aren't alone in feeling it. The head judge felt a strange tightness in his chest. He kept his back to the stage, but his shoulders had dropped an inch. He was a man who spent his life listening to music. He had heard thousands of students play this exact song. Most of them played it perfectly. They hit the right notes at the right time. But none of them played it like this. He heard a slight hesitation before a high run of notes. Technically, it was a mistake. It wasn't perfectly smooth. But the way she did it, it sounded like a sigh. It sounded human. He gripped the edge of the table. He knew that specific pause. He knew that specific way of lingering on a note just a second longer than the sheet music asked for. His mind flashed back to a small apartment he lived in 30 years ago. He saw a woman sitting at an old, upright piano. He saw sunlight catching the dust motes dancing around her. He remembered watching her hands while he read the newspaper. He remembered how safe he felt. The girl didn't know she was reaching him. She was just trying to survive the moment. She was trying to prove to herself that she wasn't empty. She played with a passion that she had kept locked away for years. She let the loneliness she felt, the grief of losing her mother, the fear of not being good enough, all of it flowed out of her fingers and into the keys. The sound filled the hall, wrapping around everyone in the room. The other students stopped whispering completely. They felt the gravity of what was happening. They realized that this wasn't just a rehearsal anymore. This was something raw and real. The girl reached the high point of the song. Her hands moved in opposite directions, creating a cascade of sound that was like water flowing over rocks. It was complex, but she didn't struggle. She was guiding the music, trusting her instincts. She wasn't thinking about the rules. She wasn't thinking about the harsh man in the suit. She was just playing. The head judge slowly turned his chair around. He didn't stand up yet. He just turned to face the stage. He watched the girl. She was still just a teenager in a simple dress, sitting hunched over the keys. But the sound she was creating was immense. It filled the huge space. He looked at her face. Her eyes were still closed, but her expression was peaceful. She looked like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The anger he had felt earlier, the annoyance at the waste of time, it had completely vanished. In its place was a look of total confusion and awe. He couldn't understand how this was the same girl who had been banging on the piano 5 minutes ago. It was as if someone else had sat down in her place. The transformation was shocking. The music began to wind down. The loud, rolling waves settled back into soft, gentle ripples. The girl slowed the tempo even more. She played the final phrase with a careful tenderness, making sure every note counted. She was saying goodbye. She pressed the final chord. She held it down, letting the strings vibrate inside the piano. The sound hummed in the air, rich and deep. She didn't lift her hands immediately. She kept them on the keys, letting the silence slowly creep back in, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the feeling the music had left behind. When the sound finally faded away completely, the girl opened her eyes. The spell broke slightly. She looked out at the empty rows of chairs and then toward the judge's table. She felt a wave of nervousness return. She wasn't sure if they would like it. She wasn't sure if she would be in trouble for changing the song without asking. She expected the judge to yell at her again. She expected him to tell her that she was wrong, or that the song was too simple. She braced herself for the harsh words. But as she looked at the man in the dark suit, she saw that he wasn't holding his pen. He wasn't looking at his clipboard. He was looking right at her. And for the first time, the stone mask was gone. The silence that followed the final note was not the same heavy, awkward silence from before. This silence felt different. It felt sacred, like the air inside the hall was holding its breath. The vibration of the piano strings was still humming in the air, a ghost of the sound that had just filled the room. The girl sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the keys, afraid that if she moved, the spell would break. At the judge's table, the man in the dark suit hadn't moved a muscle. The pen he was holding lay forgotten on the table, rolling slightly toward the edge. His eyes were fixed on the girl, but he didn't look angry anymore. The harsh lines around his mouth had softened, and his posture, usually so stiff and military-like, had slumped forward just a little. Inside his chest, his heart was beating hard. It wasn't the slow, steady rhythm of a man checking boxes on a form. It was the erratic, pounding rhythm of someone who had just been startled by a loud noise in a quiet house. He felt a strange prickle at the back of his neck, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time. The song she had played was famous. Millions of people had played it. But the way she held the notes, the way she hesitated for a fraction of a second before resolving a chord, it was exactly how his late wife used to play. It was a specific, tiny quirk that nobody else noticed but him. His wife had passed away 5 years ago. Since the day of the funeral, he had refused to listen to that song. He would turn off the radio if it came on. He would walk out of shops if he heard the melody. It hurt too much. It reminded him of the empty side of the bed and the quiet mornings that were now filled with nothing but the sound of his own coffee brewing. Hearing it now, played by a young girl who looked so small and fragile, brought all of those memories rushing back like a flood. He saw the living room of his old house. He smelled the lavender perfume his wife used to wear. He saw her hands, white and smooth, moving over the keys of their upright piano at home. It was a vivid, painful, yet beautiful hallucination. For a moment, he couldn't tell where he was. He wasn't in a cold community hall judging a competition. He was back home, listening to the love of his life. The girl finally lifted her hands from the keyboard. She placed them in her lap and looked up, her eyes searching the faces in the room. She saw the other students looking at her with wide eyes. She saw the janitor standing by the door, completely still. Then, her gaze shifted to the head judge. She expected him to pick up his pen. She expected him to look down at his clipboard and scribble something mean. But he wasn't writing. He was just staring at her with a look of total confusion. His eyes were shiny, reflecting the bright overhead lights. The girl felt a spike of panic. Had she made him angry? Had she broken a rule by playing a different song? She knew she should probably get up and leave now, but her legs felt like lead. She was glued to the bench. Slowly, the judge stood up. This was unusual. Judges almost never stood up during a performance unless they were stopping the music. They certainly didn't stand up after a student was finished playing just to stand there. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed himself up. The sound seemed to wake everyone up from the trance the music had put them in. The judge walked toward the stage. He didn't walk with his usual fast, confident stride. He walked slowly, almost hesitantly. He gripped the back of a nearby chair as he passed it, using it to steady himself. He looked like a man who was navigating a dark room, unsure of his footing. He reached the stairs leading up to the platform but didn't climb them. He stopped at the edge, standing right in front of the girl. From this distance, he looked older. He looked tired. The scary, powerful aura he carried earlier had evaporated, leaving behind just an old man in a suit. The girl looked up at him, her hands clutching the fabric of her skirt. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to say she was sorry for the first song, sorry for wasting his time. But the intensity in his eyes stopped her. You. The judge started to speak, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to find the deep, commanding tone he usually used, but it was gone. You play that song very slowly. The girl blinked, surprised by the comment. It wasn't a critique. It sounded like an observation. Yes, sir, she whispered back. Her voice was quiet and shaky. My wife, the judge continued, his eyes drifting away from her face and focusing on the piano keys, she played it like that. Exactly like that. He fell silent again. He looked at the girl's hands, then back at the piano. It was as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. He was trying to figure out how a teenage girl he had never met could possibly channel the spirit of a woman he had loved for decades. The girl watched his face closely. She saw the sadness etched deep in the wrinkles around his eyes. She realized, with a sudden jolt of clarity, that this man wasn't just a mean judge. He was a person who was hurting. He was someone who missed someone just like she missed her mother. I didn't mean to play the other song, the girl said softly, breaking the silence. I was just nervous. But this one makes me feel closer to my mom. The judge's head snapped up. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time seeing her not as a contestant, but as a human being. He nodded slowly. Music has a way of doing that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It bridges the gaps where words fail us. He reached into his jacket pocket. The girl flinched slightly, thinking he might be pulling out a red card or a penalty slip. But instead, he pulled out a white handkerchief. He didn't use it, though. He just held it tightly in his hand, twisting the fabric around his fingers. It was a nervous habit, a sign that his calm exterior was crumbling. I was harsh with you earlier, the judge said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I told you that you had no soul. I was wrong. The girl felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and fast. She didn't wipe it away. You were making noise before, he said, gesturing vaguely at the air. But this was truth. I have not heard that kind of truth in a very long time. He took a deep breath and looked around the hall, almost as if he was checking to see if anyone else was witnessing his moment of weakness. The room was still quiet. The other students were watching the interaction with intense curiosity. The air in the room felt charged, like electricity was running through the floorboards. The judge stepped back, putting a little distance between himself and the piano. He straightened his tie, trying to regain some of his composure, trying to put the armor back on. But it was too late. The girl had seen the crack in the wall. You have a gift, he said, his voice getting a little stronger, though it was still kind. But do not ever try to be someone you are not again. Do not play the loud, angry songs because you think that is what we want. We don't want that. We want what you just gave us. He looked at the piano one last time, a look of longing on his face. It was clear he wanted to touch the keys, to sit on the bench and try to find that connection again, but he didn't. He knew that moment wasn't his. It belonged to the girl. Go ahead and pack up, he told her gently. You do not need to play anything else today. You have done enough. He turned away from her then. He didn't march back to the table with his usual angry energy. He walked slowly, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. When he sat back down at the judge's table, he didn't pick up his pen. He didn't look at the next name on the list. He just sat there, looking down at his hands, lost in a memory that the girl's music had unlocked. The girl sat on the bench for a moment longer, processing what had just happened. She had come in here terrified, feeling like a failure. She was leaving knowing that she had touched the heart of the scariest man in the room. She carefully closed the lid over the keys, treating the instrument with the respect it deserved. As she stood up and grabbed her bag, she felt a little taller. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. She realized that music wasn't about winning. It was about connecting. And today, she had made a connection that mattered. The girl placed her sheet music carefully into her bag, treating the papers with the gentle respect she hadn't felt an hour ago. Her hands were still shaking a little, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was a rush of adrenaline, the kind that comes after you have been holding your breath underwater and finally come up for air. She stood up from the bench and smoothed the fabric of her skirt. She felt lighter, as if a heavy stone had been lifted off her shoulders. As she walked toward the side of the stage to leave, the atmosphere in the hall felt completely different. The other students, who had been whispering and giggling nervously before, were now watching her in total silence. A boy holding a cello bow stopped in the middle of tightening it. Two girls near the door stopped looking at their phones. They looked at her with wide eyes, sensing that something important had just happened, even if they didn't fully understand it. The girl gave them a shy, small smile as she passed by, but she didn't stop to talk. She just wanted to get to her mother, who was waiting in the hallway outside, and tell her everything. Back on stage, the head judge was still sitting at his table. But his mind was far away from the competition, the scoring sheets, and the crowd. He was staring at the empty piano bench. He could still see the imprint where the girl had been sitting. He could still hear the last fading note of Claire de Lune ringing in his ears like a bell. He looked down at his hands. They were resting on the table, the skin spotted with age, the knuckles a bit swollen from arthritis. They were the hands of an old man. But for a brief moment, when the girl was playing, he had looked at them and seen the hands of his wife. He remembered how her hands used to look when she played, delicate, graceful, and full of life. He hadn't realized how much he missed seeing those hands until the girl's music brought the image back so clearly it hurt. The judge reached for his glass of water, but his hand was trembling so much that the water rippled. He quickly pulled his hand back and clasped them together in his lap, hiding the shake. He felt exposed. He had spent years building a wall around himself, hiding his grief behind a strict mask of professionalism and rules. He told himself that if he focused on perfection, he wouldn't have to feel the pain of loss. He treated music like math. If the notes were right, the equation was solved. But the girl had just proven him wrong in the most beautiful way possible. She showed him that music wasn't math. Music was emotion. It was messy, imperfect, and raw. She had played a wrong note in the middle of the song, a tiny slip of the finger, but she hadn't stopped. She had kept going, pouring her heart into the mistake until it didn't sound like a mistake anymore. It sounded like a sigh. The judge realized that he had been punishing students for not being perfect, while all along, what he really craved was the feeling of being human again. He had been trying to protect himself from the pain of remembering his wife, but by shutting out the music that reminded him of her, he had also shut out the warmth and the love. A tear finally escaped his eye and rolled down his cheek. It was a slow, warm track on his cold skin. He didn't wipe it away. He let it sit there, cooling in the air-conditioned room. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel angry at the world for taking her away. He felt grateful. He felt grateful that he had the chance to hear her song one more time, played by a stranger who somehow understood her soul. He turned his head to look out the large windows that lined the side of the hall. Outside, the day was bright and clear. The sun was shining on the pavement, and people were walking by with their coffee cups, living their normal lives. He watched a bird land on a window ledge and fly away. Usually, at this point in a competition, he would be impatiently tapping his watch, signaling the next student to hurry up. But today, time didn't matter. He looked at the next name on his list, but he couldn't focus on the letters. The ink seemed to blur together. He couldn't judge another person today. Not now. Not after what he had just heard. It wouldn't be fair to the next student to compare them to a ghost, and it wouldn't be fair to the memory of the music he just heard. The judge slowly stood up from his chair. This time, he didn't adjust his suit or check his reflection. He didn't try to look powerful. He walked to the edge of the stage, away from the table. He stood near the velvet curtain, looking out at the empty rows of seats. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the dust and the old wood. In his mind, he wasn't a judge anymore. He was just a husband who missed his wife. He imagined she was standing there next to him. He imagined her placing a hand on his shoulder, the way she used to do when he was stressed about work. "You were always too serious," he could almost hear her say. "You need to listen to the music, not the notes." He let out a short, breathy laugh. It was a sound that surprised him. He hadn't laughed, even a little bit, in a long time. It felt like cracking open a rusted door. The tightness in his chest, the knot that had lived there for years, loosened just a little bit. He realized that he had been holding his breath for 5 years, waiting for the pain to stop, but it never did. It just waited for him to let it out. He opened his eyes and looked at the grand piano again. It looked majestic in the center of the stage, catching the light. It wasn't just a machine of wood and wire. It was a vessel. It had carried the girl's sorrow to him, and it had carried his memory back to her. The judge felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't a cure for his grief, he knew that would never fully go away, but it was a moment of kindness. It was a reminder that he wasn't alone in his sadness. There was a young girl out there who felt the same way he did. There were others who used music to survive the lonely nights. He wasn't the only one navigating the dark. He thought about the girl's face when she was playing. It was so full of concentration and peace. She wasn't thinking about winning. She wasn't thinking about him yelling at her. She was just playing. She had been brave enough to be vulnerable in front of a room full of strangers. He realized that true strength wasn't about being cold and untouchable, like he had been pretending. True strength was having the courage to show your heart, even when it was breaking. The judge stood there for a long time, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket. He didn't care if the other judges were looking at him. He didn't care about the schedule. He was taking a moment to honor his wife and the girl who had brought her back to him, if only for a few minutes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the handkerchief again. This time, he actually used it to dab his eyes and dry his face. He took a deep breath and straightened his back. He couldn't stay in this dream world forever. He had a job to do. But he knew that when he sat back down, he would be a different man. He wouldn't be the cold, angry judge who tore people apart. He would try to be the kind of judge who helped people find their voice, just like the girl had found hers. He looked toward the exit doors where the girl had disappeared. He hoped she knew how special she was. He hoped she knew that she hadn't just played a song, she had healed a wound. He whispered a quiet thank you into the empty air, feeling that somehow, somewhere, she might hear it. The girl stood near the entrance of the building, the cool air from the open door brushing against her face. Her mother was waiting for her, a look of anxious hope on her face. She had been standing in the hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of the piano, and had heard the silence that followed. She didn't ask how it went. She just saw the look in her daughter's eyes, a mixture of relief and quiet sadness, and pulled her into a tight hug. The girl leaned into her mother's coat, inhaling the familiar scent of fabric softener and home. She felt safe. The scary part of the day was over. She had played her song, and she had survived. She wanted to leave. She wanted to walk out the sliding glass doors, get into the car, and go get a warm drink to chase away the chill in her fingers. But as she adjusted her bag on her shoulder, she noticed the heavy door to the main hall opening behind her. She stopped and turned around. The head judge was standing in the doorway. He looked different in the natural light of the lobby. The harsh stage lights were gone, and without them, he looked much older. He didn't look like a powerful authority figure anymore. He looked like a tired grandfather who had just taken a long nap. He was holding his clipboard under his arm, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. When he saw that she had stopped, he paused. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words carefully. He walked over to where she and her mother were standing. His footsteps were slow and heavy on the tile floor. "You forgot this," the judge said gently. He held out his hand. Resting in his palm was a small, silver hair clip. The girl instinctively touched her hair. She hadn't even realized it had fallen out when she was leaning over the piano, pouring her heart into the music. "Oh," she said, reaching out to take it. "Thank you." She took the clip, her fingers brushing against his hand. His skin was dry and warm. "I was coming to find you," the judge said. He didn't turn to leave immediately. He looked at the girl, then at her mother, and gave a small, polite nod. "I wanted to speak to you before you left." The girl's mother tightened her grip on her daughter's arm, protectively. The judge noticed this and smiled very faintly, a soft expression that barely wrinkled the corners of his mouth. "Don't worry," he said to the mother. "I am not here to scold her. I am not here to discuss points or scoring." He looked back at the girl, his eyes serious and clear. "When I stopped you earlier, I told you that you had no soul. I told you that you were wasting time. I was wrong." The girl felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, unable to speak. "When you played the second song," the judge continued, his voice dropping lower so that only they could hear, "it wasn't just a performance. You played with a truth that I have not heard in a very long time." He paused, looking past the girl for a moment, as if he was seeing something that wasn't there. "My wife, she passed away 5 years ago. She was a pianist. That song you played, the way you held the notes, it was exactly how she used to play it on Sunday mornings." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide. She suddenly understood why he had reacted the way he did. The confusion, the silence, the tears, it all made sense now. She hadn't just played a song, she had unlocked a memory for him. "I have refused to listen to that song since she died," the judge admitted. It seemed hard for him to say the words. He was a man used to being in control, and admitting to pain was a loss of control. But today, for the first time, the music didn't hurt. It felt like she was in the room with me. "And that is a gift you gave me." The girl felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "I was playing it for my mom," she whispered. She passed away too. I just wanted to feel close to her again. The judge reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a fatherly gesture, gentle and firm. He didn't squeeze hard, just rested his hand there to offer support. Then we both understand each other, he said softly. We are both just trying to hold on to something we lost. He looked at the girl with a newfound respect. You have a rare gift. Do not ever let anyone, especially a judge like me, tell you how to use it. You know the way. Trust your heart. He pulled his hand back and straightened his jacket. As for the competition, do not worry about the score. I cannot speak for the other judges, but for me, you do not need a trophy to tell you that you are a musician. You proved that today. The girl smiled, a genuine, bright smile that lit up her face. Thank you, sir, she said. Thank you, the judge replied. He stood there for a moment longer, looking at the girl and her mother. He saw the bond between them, the way the mother hovered protectively, the way the daughter leaned in for support. He realized that he had been living in a cold, empty world of his own making, shutting out the warmth of human connection because he was afraid of the pain. This girl had shown him that the pain was worth it if it meant you could feel the love, too. Well, he said, breaking the quiet moment. You should go home and get some rest. You have earned it. Goodbye, sir, the girl said. Goodbye. The judge watched as they turned and walked toward the glass doors. The girl pushed the door open, holding it for her mother. Before she stepped out into the sunlight, she stopped and looked back one last time. She raised her hand in a small wave. The judge lifted his hand in return. He watched until they were out of sight, until the automatic doors slid shut and the lobby was quiet again. He stood there alone for a long time. The air around him felt different now. It felt lighter. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He looked down at his hands again. They were the same old, wrinkled hands as before, but they didn't feel as heavy. He looked at the clipboard under his arm. He knew there were more students inside waiting to be judged. He knew he had to go back in and sit at the table. But he knew he wouldn't be the same judge who walked out earlier. He wasn't going to look for mistakes anymore. He wasn't going to look for technical perfection or rigid rules. He was going to listen for the feeling. He was going to listen for the heartbeat in the music. If a young girl could teach him that, the least he could do was honor the lesson. The judge turned around and walked back toward the heavy wooden doors of the hall. He pushed them open and stepped into the hallway. The sounds of the students tuning their instruments met his ears. Usually, this sound annoyed him. Today, it sounded like life. It sounded like people trying to speak, even if they didn't have the words yet. He walked with a softer step. He didn't stomp or march. He walked down the hall, thinking of the silver hair clip in the girl's hand and the song that had bridged the gap between his past and his present. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he had heard. And he was humming a very soft, very slow melody under his breath.